Can AI write a book without half the alphabet? Like a book that doesn't use N through Z? Or one that skips every other letter? Or even more insane, one that avoids the most common letters entirely? And then I had a crazier idea. What if we didn't stop there? What if we keep removing more and more letters from what the AI can use? Now that might seem like a tall order for a human, but an LLM should have no problem with this task, right? Right? Let's start simple and ask ChatGPT to generate text without one letter, specifically the letter E. But why this letter, you ask? Well, it's only the most commonly occurring letter in the English language, which means it should already be a pretty big challenge. Okay, ChatGPT, generate a sentence without the letter E. And boom! Easy. Let's kick things up a notch. Do the same for a paragraph. Control F says, yes, it generated a whole paragraph without the letter E. So at this point, I feel like I can just ask it to generate a whole novel without half the alphabet. But before that, let me conduct one last test. ChatGPT, write a 500-word essay without the letter E. And moment of truth. Okay, so that didn't work. Let's try again. Generating text and, well, same problem. Perfect. I then tried a bunch of prompt variations, different wording, even different models, but all the same result. As a last-ditch effort, I let ChatGPT write a normal story, then asked it to rewrite each sentence without the letter E. But it still failed, and that wasn't even the worst part.
You're lying. And you're a piece of shit.
So what's happening here? Why is this so hard for something that can explain quantum physics to a 5-year-old and write fanfiction about Shrek? Well, here's the truth. LLMs are terrible at lipograms. Like, please stop embarrassing yourself levels of terrible. And it all comes down to how they generate text. You see, they don't actually think about sentences the way us humans do. They don't sit there planning, oh yes, today I shall craft the most beautiful paragraph without the forbidden letter. No. They aggressively try to predict the most statistically probable next word. And because letters like E show up in literally everything they've ever read, the model is hopelessly addicted to using it. So is it even possible to generate a novel without half the alphabet, much less without one letter? Well, that sounds like a bad enough idea that I have to try it. At this point, my first idea was, unsatisfactory at best. The general idea revolved around a wrapper script for making API calls to ChatGPT. After each sentence, I'd scan for the omitted letters, and if I found one, I'd ask the model to rephrase it. Now this process would repeat recursively, and a model would have a max of 3 tries per sentence. If the sentence still contained E, I would manually sanitize it with a custom function. But I didn't do that because 1, that's kinda stupid, and 2, I found a better solution. While researching LLMs and lipograms, I came across a blog post by a data scientist named Corey Hansen. He described how we can place a mask over tokens that contain the letter E. The model then zeroes out the probabilities that contribute to predicting that token. Now if that's confusing, don't worry, I got you. So imagine you're a delivery driver who has a bunch of different stops, but on this given day, you only need to make it to 4 of those stops. Each stop is a token, and the order in which you visit each stop is a word. So let's say you drive to each stop based on how convenient they are, and arrive at stops M-I-L-K in that order. But now let's say every road leading to K is under construction. You can still get to this stop, but it becomes much more undesirable. That's token masking. So instead of going to stop K, you go to stop E at the very end, and your route becomes M-I-L-E. So anyways, that's the general idea behind this token masking, and based on what was in the blog post, I crafted my own script. Now since I'm using a MacBook for this, I can actually harness the power of MLX-LM, Apple's framework for running LLMs locally. Which, side note, alleviated stress I didn't know was even possible. Before switching over, I must have spent like 10 hours constantly debugging something that was breaking. At one point, I was so lost I just decided to search, am I bad at coding? Which didn't make me feel any better. I don't know why I thought this video was a good idea. Actually, I do. It's because I didn't think. But then, by some miracle, I guess Google took pity on me because it just gave me this alternative. And just like that, voila, we have a model that will not generate text with the letter E.
Wow, that's really cool.
Yeah, it is.
So you're done.
Nope, because this only works for one letter.
Corey literally just solved your biggest problem. All you have to do is add more letters to that omit list, right? Right?
Turns out, No. Corey's solution works pretty well for only omitting one letter, but it kinda breaks whenever we omit even more letters. I mean, look at this. It's not even English at this point. So I immediately got to work on the changes. First, I switched to a larger model. More parameters, deeper reasoning, less nonsense. As a result, the output should look more natural. Then I masked every token except English letters, digits, and a few safe punctuation characters. This should prevent the model from using foreign language characters, math symbols, and Unicode junk that you probably wouldn't see in an English book. I also adjusted the temperature and nucleus sampling, which controls the creativity and diversity of the output. And finally, I added a very basic spell checker because sometimes the model generates non-existent words that are kinda close to the real ones. Okay, so it kinda works. And boom! Now we have something usable. I can change my omit list to exclude any number of letters in the English alphabet, and it looks pretty good for the most part. But one huge problem remains. We don't have a novel. We're able to generate some pretty short responses, but what about an entire book? Now, I can change the max tokens parameter in the text generation, but as the name implies, this value only defines the ceiling value that can't be exceeded. If I set this value to 100,000 tokens, for example, it'll probably output something far below that. And even if it did generate that many tokens in one generation, it would take a very long time and we wouldn't be able to see a live update of what it was generating. To make matters worse, if anything happened to my laptop that made it crash or ended the program, I'd end up losing all the progress that was made. There's gotta be a better way. Okay, so instead of generating everything at once, what if we did it in chunks? The average novel is, say, 80 to 90,000 words, which is well over 100,000 tokens. So here's the plan. After we get the prompt, I'll first ask the model to generate 14 sentences that act as chapter summaries, which each define what should happen for a particular chunk. For each chunk, I'll recursively feed the model 3 bits of information: the initial prompt, the current chapter header, and the last 1,000 tokens of the currently existing story, after which I'll tell the model to continue it. Now, if you're wondering why I'm only giving it the last 1,000 tokens and not the whole story, that's because the more tokens I give it as input, the slower it'll take to retrieve the output. Another solution would be summarizing the whole story, but I'm worried that I'll lose crucial details if I do that. Plus, I can always feed the model all of the chapter summaries if I need to. I'll also print out each generation on screen so I can see live updates. And after a few hours of putting it together, here's the results. Okay, so I'm noticing a lot of problems here. The text is very inconsistent. The characters keep changing, the setting is flimsy at best, and I don't think the model understands the concept of a plot. And there's a bunch of other things that just aren't going well. So after thinking it over, I think I just need to enhance my prompts. I added in this prompt background JSON file, and it should make every prompt crystal clear. Now, I'm still not expecting perfect results because literally telling it not to use half the alphabet, but hopefully the output has a much more refined quality to it. Now, I currently set my omit list to the least frequent letters, which should give us the best output. And after letting the program run for a little while, I did notice a substantial improvement in quality. Now, the last thing I had to do was add a save feature because what if my laptop goes on vacation? So then I spent a little more time implementing it, which allows the user to pick up the story from wherever they left off. And just like that, everything is coming along, and I am very excited to let this sucker generate a whole novel. Okay, so I know I said the save feature was the very last thing I want to do, but I lied. The very last thing I absolutely must do is save all the text to a text file. That way I can send it to my friends and tell them that I finally accomplished something meaningful in my life. And with just a few modifications to the codebase, I finally have a text file that will house my finished book. So just like before, I'm going to begin with the least frequent letters and see what happens. Let's start it up. Now I added in this little script here that detects the presence of the forbidden letters. If I add one of them to my text file, we can see that the script returns fail, but if I remove it, then it gives me pass. So inputting the whole novel, we can see it doesn't contain any of these letters. Now I also plugged it into a word counter, and it's over 93,000 words, which is about what I expected. But let's get into the actual results. You'll probably notice that despite having 23,000 tokens to work with, there's a lot of repetition in the sentences, and it becomes very obvious in this text file. Most of the first sentences for each generation starts with either a name or the word as, which makes it kind of boring to read. But what about the actual content? Well, I can't say it's that great either. The story starts off with someone called Ada Reed, which I'm pretty sure is supposed to be Aiden Reed. Now, we don't get much context as to who he is, but the model seems to be leaning into describing everything in as much detail as possible. And just skimming the entire novel, it seems like the story is just circling around the same setting. There's not even anything I would classify as a definitive conclusion. But I guess that's just what happens when you exclude that many characters. I want to keep going with some more experiments though, so let's omit the second half of the alphabet with letters N through Z. And immediately, I have noticed that the model is taking a much longer time to generate output, which is why I stopped it prematurely. You can probably tell at a glance that this is not a story worth your time. I'm not even sure how to read some of this, but let's keep moving on. So we've tried half the alphabet, but what if we omitted even more than that? I'm going to once again start with the least frequent letters and work my way up until I've banned every single letter from the output. And finally, just for fun, here's what the output is if we ban every single letter in the alphabet. So, can AI generate a novel without half the alphabet? Well, sort of. But the output is also pretty understandable, as we didn't allow the LLM to use the vast majority of tokens, which made it pretty hard to put together a coherent sentence. Maybe if there was a model that was only trained on half the alphabet, it would have fared better. My guess is that's never going to happen though, but if that person is you, feel free to hit me up, I'll definitely try it. Anyways, thanks for watching, I'll see you next time.